Hey everybody, Riot Mort here, and it is time for another Monday morning meta report. It's week 4 of this very long holiday patch, but we're getting through it, and we're almost there, and hopefully you had a great Christmas. So yeah, let's dive right in. As always, same disclaimers as last time, based on early experiences or internal data, stuff like that. And like I said, most of my team's on holiday break. I'm not going to bother them during the break. So this is mostly my personal viewpoint. I've been playing quite a few games for better or worse, and checking it out. It's just my viewpoint. Anything included in this report does not mean we're acting on these. And as always, data just tells us what is, not what can be. And yeah, all right, there's the usual disclaimers out of the way. Let's talk about it. All right, so generally what we're seeing now is the meta is pretty stabilizing. It's stabilizing. It's becoming pretty well known, at least right now. There haven't been any major twists or major discoveries. There's still minor adaptations at the top, things like that, especially around positioning that we're seeing. But overall, the meta is what it is, I think, for right now. Without any changes, I don't think we're going to see too many major shifts. That being said, I think there's definitely a few things that are off right now. Definitely things that if I could, snap my fingers, wouldn't be the way they are right now. We're definitely seeing combat pacing be too fast in late game boards, especially around boards around Yunara, T-Hex, Tryndamere, things like that. Even things like Baron, I think, are actually pretty fast for what they're supposed to be. This is leading to a situation where it feels like you can't really play tanky options and things like that. And generally, this is a good sign that when combat pacing is too fast, that we probably need to be doing nerfs rather than buffs, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, so a lot of these champions are just doing way too much damage. Another thing to call out is that caster archetypes are kind of being shut down by certain late game power options. So this is if you want to play around things like, say, Lux or Ziggs or any of those other AP options. They're being shut down by things like Diana, Kindred, and Taric. Diana because she consistently brings up that shield over and over, which means as an AP champ, you're kind of just hitting the shield over and over without really getting through it. And then Kindred and Taric with their like Ox Force-like effects. It doesn't really feel good to have your Ziggs bomb hit a Taric who's in that, super defensive state. Or Kindred, who just blocks a lot of damage. And in fact, Kindred has kind of become the counter to the current high-paced meta, because Kindred just buys you that 2.5 seconds that can really make or break a lot of fights. And on top of the fact she uses a lot of the really good items that are pretty popular right now, the Ginsus, the Kraken, things like that. Kraken in particular also leading to a lot of that high-paced things we're talking about. So many comps right now are running 1 to 2 Krakens, which is a lot. So, and then otherwise, optimized value options are leading a bit to too much consistency. This is things like Bilgewater, Bard, Ionia. It was Yordle at the start of the set. I think Yordle's fallen off in favor of things like, Bilgewater and Bard in particular. I think at the highest levels, we're seeing Bard on a lot of in-game boards. And then lastly, we've talked about this one a bunch of times at this point, but I'll just keep reiterating it, is that the ability to reach 9 and 10 in high econ games is way too common. We're seeing things like level 10 on 4.2, 4.5 in some extreme cases. Some of those augments we let sit through the break, when they show up, games get pretty wild. And so all of these factors combined are leading to a situation that in a set with 100 champions is feeling a bit narrow and a bit fast-paced. Definitely not where I would have loved it. So, like I said, I think you can expect a more nerf-based patch next patch. And this is on top of all the other stuff we've covered in last week's report, right? I don't need to beat on the Noxus and Zaun drum again. We know they're not really performing. Or Jinx, who's had that rework sitting there ready to go until the next patch. So definitely some things that are off. But, it is what it is. Overall, though, and that leads me to the next thing I want to talk about, which is sort of like the rise of T-Hex, 100-set champion, and what we can learn from it. T-Hex is an interesting spot because, and this is where for once I do get to be a little like, I told you so. And, someone's going to go well, you guys did buff it. I don't think the buff to T-Hex really changed that much. It was a slight shift in power where it was able to burst down single targets a little bit more, but less AoE. And that's the funny thing. If you look at how T-Hex operates, saying less AoE, you're like, it used to be more? That's a little crazy. But what really happened was a guide came out and someone really optimized T-Hex and how to play it and how you're supposed to get that Caitlyn 3 as early as possible. really optimized how important Caitlyn 3 is in conjunction with certain items, right? Like going the full offensive item build and really optimized the build. And I think the thing to call out here is less of an I told you so and more of, if we really evaluate the game state, we can learn a lot of really important lessons from T-Hex, right? Like long term, there's a lot to learn here, right? About like, hey, when you have a read on power, or how deep this game is, right? How much the difference between the right items and the right positioning and the right optimizations can matter. I tried to play a T-Hex game the other day just to test it out where I got Vi 3 instead of Caitlyn 3. And man, the difference was insane, right? It's like it wasn't good, actually. And so it leads to like, well, what was going on is people were basing their perception of T-Hex around like the normal Fast 8 version where you eat a Caitlyn 2 or things like that. And so there's just a lot of interesting things about a build like that that really a lot of the times, we should leave players to explore it and figure it out. There's another thing worth calling out here that, a lot of our top level players, when they make these like tier lists out there and guides and things like that, they don't truly understand everything, right? Like those guides are, again, as we say in the disclaimer at the beginning, they're a reflection of what is, not what can be, and so it's just something we're going to have to keep in mind as we move forward. And I'm hoping players will as well. Yeah. And then the other point I wanted to talk about, what this kind of brings up, is that like generally at the top level, like at the absolute, top 0.5% of players, it's not the best balanced meta we've ever had. But despite that, with this set, player perception is quite high, especially below that top 0.5%. And even the top players are having fun, right? I saw top players at like 350, 400 games played already, which is wild, so there's something to learn about this set in particular, what the 100 Champions does, the level of variety, the level of like depth to explore, things like that. I think the fact that there are a lot of different paths that you can take to reach all of these builds has actually done a lot of good for the game. And what I mean by that is not just paths in terms of like number of champions or even like the augments and the augment types you can get there. But one of the things I think has been really beneficial to this set has been essentially the hidden resources. And this can be rerolls from Bard, as people have learned how to play Bard. And it's funny because you look at like the Paris Open, right? The Paris Open, our top players had played like 200, 300 games before Paris Open, and no one was using Bard as a reroll generator, right? Like that took a while for players to catch on and really learn how to use Bard in that way, which is interesting. The other resources include like the Bilgewater shop. There's other ones I'm blanking, but there's a lot of like cool things you can do to generate some extra value as you play the game. And that's leading to a really just deep experience. And so my hope is that we can continue to expand how deep it is and make sure there are more lines viable. But long term, there's actually something about TFT here that we should be keeping in mind for future sets, right? And it's like drip econ and things like that. And what are the system? And I don't want to make this too long. I could go into a lot of depth about like what this means, but there's just a lot of good to be learned here. There was a tweet actually from a player who, hilariously enough, I used to have blocked, Travis Watt from EU, where he was like, actually the meta's really rough, and if this were any other set, we'd be a lot more complaining. And I actually agree with him to some extent, because yeah, it's definitely not one of those like perfect metas, but the fact that there's all these extra systems to play with, these extra resources, and I don't mean resources in terms of gold, I just mean in terms of like mechanical depth, that this set covers a lot of bases there, and that's a good thing. And so figuring out ways to weaponize that in the future is going to be, I think, good for long-term TFT. So anyway, I've rambled on for a bit, but TLDR here, lots of cool learnings, I think, from this patch and this break. All right, Portable Forge. This is the most uninteresting slide. Nothing's changed. Literally in the week, I went to look at the stats. I even narrowed it down to top 1%. The numbers are like the exact same. It's still 4.45 at 2-1. It gets weaker as the game goes on. Nothing's changed here. Portable Forge is exactly where it's supposed to be. It's still the most picked augment, which means generally the artifacts are, for the most part, in an okay spot. Again, there's probably like little bits of ear flicks here and there. I know there's at least one challenger play that was like collector's OP, and other ones that are like, there's weaker ones. So like, definitely not saying it's perfect, but we're not way out of line here, which is good, and that's what these we're going to continually check on. On the augment side, really not a ton of major shifts. I think the least surprising shift is that Hexgate Travel is now the #1 augment. Shocker. Last week it was #2 and it was on the rise, and this was before T-Hex really, really took off. Now T-Hex is, I mean, if you're not seeing 2 or 3 of them in your games, what are you doing, right? Like, I mean, I've seen people playing in the Rise portal not hit Piltover and still force T-Hex. It's definitely that level of invasive, and this augment definitely pushes it into insane, where you can guarantee that Caitlyn 3. So definitely a very good augment. Golden Egg still #2. Otherwise, a lot of the same stuff you'd see. Awakened Soul, Slice of Life has moved up, which is interesting. That one moved up. Jarvan Shyvana has moved back up. Birthday Reunion. Shimmer Scale Essence level up. Malicious Monetization. Bronze for Life 2. And Bandle Bounty now after last week's report. Last week's report, it was sitting at like a 4.29, but it had that really high win rate. Now it's moved up. It's actually now closer to like 4.1, but still has that really high win rate. So Bandle Bounty now looking really, really strong for the people. But it also has a very low play rate. So it's like, it might be one of those self-selecting ones, kind of like Golden Egg, but it's doing quite well. On the bottom 90% of players, not a lot has changed. The fact Silco's Revenge is still good there is pretty wild. But this is looking very similar to last week's, with a couple things have moved around. Again, early learning still being there to me is still very interesting. But yeah, otherwise, that's low elo. And then on the underperforming side, this list has gotten a bit bigger. Certainly as the meta has stabilized and people have realized what's working and what's not, the things that aren't start to work even less. It is a lot of the same stuff. The emblems, hard commit, flexible, things like that. We stick together, etc., etc. Ishtal Expeditionist still there, like we always talked about. I think some of the new stuff, though, we're seeing at the bottom here. Chaos Magic, certainly underperforming. That's one that definitely needs some love. Bringer of Ruin, just the fact that Nox's vertical is basically unplayable right now. And then Golemify, not surprising here. But yeah, a lot of the same stuff. Bottom 90% of players. World Runes, again, we've talked about this one before. It's the trait tracker of the set. World Runes is going to be really terrible at low elo, but decent at high elo who know how to optimize it and know how to play it, especially as Rise goes up in power. Treasure Hunt is another very unintuitive augment. We were talking about this on my Discord. A lot of players probably just play it wrong at lower elos, so Treasure Hunt kind of underperforming. But otherwise, a lot of the same here. And then the known bugs. There's nothing new to add here. I'm not going to read them off again. It's the same as last week. I haven't added any new known bugs. Definitely seeing like random cases of bug reports here and there, but nothing worth highlighting on, putting a spotlight on, because a lot of them are very rare. But these are the known bugs, and yeah, that's kind of it. So, like I said, this is another meta report. We still have a ways to go. It's the 27th I'm recording this on, which means you'll see it on the 29th. The next Monday meta report will have been preparing the patch to go live that Wednesday. So basically, from the time you're watching this, patch is in 9 days still. So still a ways before we have our next patch, but that's what comes with the holiday season, is what it is. So, yeah. All right. That's going to do it for me. Hopefully you guys are enjoying Lore and Legends. And yeah. All right. Until next time, take it easy.